An unusual windstorm rolled through the Willamette Valley about 24 hours ago at the time of recording, and the National Weather Service has put out warnings for major flooding. I'm going to be talking about that. I'm meteorologist Tansley coming at you with this update. I will start with the squall line windstorm aftermath, starting off with the peak gusts at the official sites, which are pretty much all the municipal and major airports, so going from north to south here. Vancouver hit 44 miles per hour, 55 miles per hour at PDX, 43 miles per hour at Troutdale, Hillsborough at 48 miles per hour, 47 miles per hour at Aurora, 59 miles per hour in Salem, 52 miles per hour in Corvallis, and 49 miles per hour in Eugene. The one airport that is missing from here is, or two airports, sorry, is the one in Kelso/Longview, which gusts were only in the 30s for that, and McMinnville, which I did not receive any data back from. Also, these three stations that are italicized, those three stations went down during the windstorm. I don't know if it was just power outage or lack of data reporting. I believe Salem's was a proper power outage. So, just as a side note, for that, this data was all recovered after the fact, so I do believe these readings are accurate. So some stats, this was the fastest wind gust at PDX since April 7, 2017. It's also the second winter in a row where a west or southwest wind gust happened at 50 miles per hour or greater. Last winter, it happened because of a severe thunderstorm instead of a squall line. So it was far more localized as a result and didn't really cause a lot of tree damage in comparison, even to the local area. Peak power outages across Northwest Oregon and Southwest Washington. So this includes all the numbers from PGE, Pacific Power, and Clark County Public Utility District peaked at 266,000 customers from what I saw. This definitely has a case to just be called a Pacific Northwest regional windstorm. I'd argue probably biggest case in 30 years because it gusted up to about 70 miles per hour in the North Puget Sound and gusted up to 84 miles per hour in the Columbia Basin at the basin floor. Gusted even higher in some spots in elevated areas. As a disclaimer, because this was not the classic windstorm setup where you get pure southerly winds in terms of a whole system, I'm not going to call it regional, at least not in the short term, till there's a greater consensus in the meteorological industry on that. One other thing I'd like to touch on is why 55 miles per hour caused numerous power outages. Now, the trees here are adapted to southerly wind gusts where most of our windstorms are from. When winds come from a different direction, it can lower that threshold for or damage because the trees aren't really grown to be protected against that. So the damage here is more equivalent to gusts I'd expect in the 60 to 70 mile per hour range rather than 40 to 55 miles per hour. So, and just for reference, the last 70 mile per hour windstorm was February 2002. So that is stronger than what this is referencing. So that would be the last time that I could unequivocally say that, hey, that was a windstorm that would have produced more damage than this if it came from the south. This windstorm was restricted to just the South Valley, so Eugene up to Corvallis, and that's about it. Saturated ground from recent rainfall softens up the soil, which makes it easier for trees to uproot, which can indirectly cause power outages that way via it falling on power lines. Lack of a local major windstorm in 11 years, December 2014, that was just PDX focus where it hit 67 miles per hour, or a regional major windstorm in 30 years, which last occurred in December of 1995, may have made trees less resistant, especially newer growth. This is one I'm a little bit more uncertain of, but is a theory that could play out. And then the last thing I'd like to talk about is why did I not come out with a video before? Other than I do have a life other than this. My normal threshold for making a windstorm video is a chance of 60 mile per hour gusts or significant enough damage to warrant one, or lack of coverage on a potential event. Behind the scenes, I was forecasting about 40 to 45 miles per hour for this with about to a couple areas reaching 50. And even though winds were coming out of the west, I did not see how many power outages would be happening. I thought it's like, okay, probably typical amount of power outages for a 50-mile-per-hour wind storm. That's not a huge concern of mine. I could get away with not making a video from this. Of course, if you told me ahead of time that there's going to be 250,000 plus power outages, I probably would have made one in hindsight. Even if it's a quick hitter like what I'm trying to do with the flood side here. And then also as a note, when I'm saying the lack of coverage, last year I made a video of a potential windstorm that was pretty much unfolding as it happened right after Christmas Day that ended up not materializing, and it kind of fell apart at the literal last second instead of strengthening even further like models indicated. Um, I'm talking like something like that, where it's just a sudden change in models or the forecast, and I have no choice but to report it. All right, so on to our atmospheric river coming up. And I also don't normally report on atmospheric rivers just because atmospheric rivers happen pretty often, actually, in the Pacific Northwest. On average, they actually happen once a week here. It's just most of them are primarily beneficial. This portion of the video got triggered because of the major flooding that has been forecast by the National Weather Service. So I'm going to be going over that right after I go over the modeled rainfall totals. So on the left here is the American GFS model. These are the non-AI versions for the record, showing anywhere from about 2.5 to 3.5 inches of rain, while the Euro model is a little bit more conservative, more in the 2 to 3 inch range. The higher resolution models, the HRRR model, showing about 1 to 2.5 inches, and the Canadian high resolution model pretty consistent around 2.5 inches regardless of location. Then for our local model produced by the University of Washington, the WRF GFS model, if you're from about Albany north, it's saying about 1.5 to 2 inches. But Albany down south to Eugene, it's thinking it's going to be closer to about 2.5 to 3 inches. So pretty sharp divide with that. My official forecast from this would be about 1.5 to 2.5 inches. So I am going to be on the lower end of the totals for this, which is unlike me because most of you who've seen my videos know that I tend to have an aggressive bias when it comes to extreme weather events. But especially the high resolution models, and knowing that the global models, the GFS and the Euro, generally underdo the rain shadow of the coast range, which is just weird because they do the rain shadow of the Olympic Peninsula very well. Taking both of those into account means to me that I think these two things are a little bit overdone. I think a few isolated areas may see up to 3 inches, but again, those would probably be isolated. So this is the Portland National Weather Service's watches and warnings map, and I'm showing the website in particular so I can jump straight to the river gauges right afterwards, rather than having this be a slide. So first off, wind advisory is up for the entirety of the Willamette Valley, plus the northern Oregon Coast Range and the Washington Coast Ranges. High wind warning is up for the Central Coast and the Central Oregon Coast Range. A winter weather advisory is up for the Cascades before the snow level rises to 6,000 feet, if not even a little bit higher, as this moisture will originate from the tropical Pacific. And then you can see a lot of these smaller green, almost looks like streams. That's because they follow the rivers. That is a flood warning, and that is what I'm going to be talking about here. There's a lot of them. That's on top of the flood watch that's been issued pretty much for everywhere Cascades West. So this is the overall picture here, and anything in yellow signifies that's an action stage, which signifies that it's getting close to flooding. Orange shows minor flooding, red shows moderate flooding, and purple shows major flooding. So 4 rivers on this map show major flooding. Another 6 on here show moderate flooding. I'm only going to go over the moderate or above just because it would take a little bit too long. I'll start here on the coast side of things, the Siletz River over here, and it is forecast to hit 22.61 inches from the River Forecast Center in Portland, peaking tonight at 10 o'clock. These are about 6-hour increments. And then moving on over directly east is the Lyukamet River, which is forecast to crest a little bit later or late Friday night or early Saturday morning because this river does not respond as quickly as some other rivers due to its more meandering nature once it exits the coast range. This also reaches the middle range of moderate flood stage. And then moving on north here, where the bulk of the forecasted flooding is the South Yamhill River in McMinnville, which is midway through the moderate flood stage early on Saturday morning. Another river that has a delay in response due to its meandering nature between Grand Ronde and McMinnville. Then moving on east, the Pudding River. That is showing moderate flooding. Also, this one is probably meanders the most, so this one will hold as a moderate flood for about 24 to 36 hours as a result before going below moderate flood stage on Sunday morning. Then the first of the major floods is the Malala River near Canby, which this one doesn't really get that far into major flooding, but it does reach about 1,500 feet over the major flood criteria, which is 25 feet. This would inundate a lot of structures, not necessarily Canby proper, because Canby is more elevated, but a lot of the farmland nearby. And then moving on to the Clackamas here, there are two separate gauges here. The first is in Estacada, which briefly reaches major flood stage early on Friday morning. And then down closer to Oregon City, this reaches pretty close to major flood stage. Not quite, though, at the major point. One thing to note is that if this was to verify, this would actually set a record crest for this gauge. I don't know how old this gauge has been here, so that is a little bit of a disclaimer, but this gauge has never hit major flood stage. I'm going to scroll down and see if it says it does not. Okay. The one minor I will cover is the one in Willamette Falls. Now, the Willamette River here is actually affected by the tides up to Willamette Falls. It is forecast to hit minor flood stage, which could impact some of the walkways right down in downtown Oregon City, but I don't expect any sort of damage from that, assuming that verifies. Johnson Creek is notorious for flooding. It's forecast to hit major flood stage and make a run at the all-time record crest, and Johnson Creek responds quickly. So once the atmospheric river is done, it's going to crash quickly in comparison to some of these other rivers, moving back to the Pudding River, for example, where it just holds. Then the last one in the Willamette Valley I will talk about is the Sandy River, which gets pretty close to major flood stage at 21 and a quarter or feet near the mouth of the Bull Run River. Though since Sandy River is in a canyon, I don't really expect a lot of damage from this in comparison to something like the potential of farmland damage from a lot of these other rivers. And then lastly, the Hood River. This is probably the one I'm the most concerned about just because this one goes right by the Hood River Marina here, and this one is forecast to hit major flood stage briefly right around when this atmospheric river ends as well. This is also a quicker responding river just because it flows a lot quicker, decreases elevation very quickly as well, and doesn't really meander like at all. So that's a overview of flood gauges that could be reaching flood stage. And in terms of what the National Weather Service is forecasting to justify, they are forecasting really anywhere from about 2 inches in the valley to about 3 to 3.25 inches. So a little bit more than my forecast. So if my forecast verifies it and it comes in a little bit lower than the National Weather Service, I don't expect flooding as bad as all of this indicates. And also, I just want to preface this is not going to be as bad as April 2019 down the South Valley or February 1996. It's not going to be a great flood. Yeah, there's going to be localized area of flooding, a little bit more than we're used to here, but it's not something that's like ringing alarm bells. So I am going to throw some ice over that, and I do think that Johnson Creek will probably hit major flood stage because Johnson Creek has a mind of its own. But everything else, if my forecast were to verify, I don't really expect anything above moderate, at least if it's in the middle end of my forecast. If it's on the upper end, maybe the Malala hits a major flood stage in the Hood River, but Clackamas River is the one I'm the most skeptical of in this case. All right, I've already rambled on long enough about this. So if you did want to look at a previous flood, my first video ever on this channel was just a slideshow image of the what I just jokingly called the Great Flood of 2019 uh, down in the Corvallis area. So I will be linking that in the end card rather than my usual end card, which would be the winter forecast. So we'll see how this turns out. I will not come out with any updates nor a 7-day forecast on this because, again, I've already rambled on long enough. So until then, please stay safe out there and